Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Zodiac Bandit, and today I want to be talking about how I think the Campaign 4 schedule is going to work. And what do I mean by that? Specifically, I want to talk about the tables and how often we're going to be switching between said tables. And I have a couple of possibilities that I think could play out, more so some more than others, but I do have three possibilities and three possible ways for how scheduling could work for us to watch them as viewers, and for them for scheduling purposes for their real life voice acting stuff. So I think this will be a fun conversation. As of right now, we don't have too many details about how they're scheduling stuff. We don't know how they're recording things. We don't know how often they're going to be switching tables. So I think this is going to be a fun thing for us to really sit down and talk about and try to learn and engage. The only thing we do know about their scheduling as of right now is that they do take the last week of every month off. So we do know November, there's 4 Thursdays in November. So that means we're going to get 3 episodes because the last Thursday is the last Thursday of the month, so they would take it off anyway, but it's also Thanksgiving. So holidays also play into effect and all that sort of stuff. Luckily, the last week of the month also happens to line up with a holiday, so we're good on that front, which is nice. So realistically, I don't have anything else other than to get into the video, other than I don't know what type of visuals I'm gonna have up on the screen because I don't know how this will look. So it might just be the thumbnail, which happens sometimes, but yeah, thought I'd give you that. Also, mild spoiler warning just in case I do talk about some story stuff, because that might be relevant for examples and stuff later, so spoiler warning. So I have 3 different ideas of how things could work out. There would be switch every single week, there would be switch every month, and there would be switch after every story arc completes. And each of them have their pros and their cons, so that's what we're going to run through right now. So starting with switching every single week, every week we see a different group. This works well for scheduling as they will be able to take the last Thursday off every month, and it could really help for the players being able to schedule other voice acting stuff. So think about it this way. The soldiers are week 1, that means they would have week 2 to 4 to do whatever they want and not outside doing regular voice acting stuff. This way they also aren't locked into specific groups for months at a time. This way we can see over a course of a month each storyline be played out. However, the downside of this is I think that would actually kill off the story investment, having to wait 3 to 4 weeks for us to see how X thing plays out with the soldiers is going to absolutely kill any pacing and investment that people have, because by the time we get back around, it's oh right, we're doing this with the soldiers. And I think that would be very negative for them, and some people would rather be locked into a single group for an entire arc. That way we have the investment, we have the story, and everything's laid out before us before we switch to the next one. I think just pacing wise, it'll work a lot better if we don't do the switch every single week. And I honestly think this is the weakest one you could pick anyway, because I think, it's best off to have the better pacing, because a lot of people bitched and complained about the pacing from Campaign 3. So to make it even worse, to literally ramp it up by 3 times 3 of how often we take breaks from these characters would be a horrific thing for them to do, and it would absolutely destroy any pacing and any investment that people have within each group. So switching every single week, while it is a possibility, I think it's the worst one they could take. Then we have switching every month, which would also help the players in their schedules. They know that for an entire month, they shouldn't really book anything on X day. And then for the next 2 full months afterwards, they would be able to, do any booking and any scheduling stuff without having to worry about Critical Role. And then eventually, after that 2 months pass, they go, oh, right, Critical Role is back up. I need to put that on my schedule. I can't schedule things on this day. I think this would really help them for their outside voice acting stuff quite a bit, to be able to be okay, this month I can't book this day because I'm doing Critical Role. I do think that is a huge benefit for the switching every month to a different table. So month 1, you have the soldiers, month 2, you have the seekers, and month 3, you have the schemers. And this way, like I said, every 2 months, you don't have to worry about anything. And then once those 2 months are up, you then have to worry about Critical Role. You can't schedule stuff on this day. I think this would really help the players out with their scheduling. And a benefit over switching every week is that we get to see more of the groups, or of a single group at a time, and we're not locked into a super long extended period with them. We have 3 to 4 episodes per month with them, depending on if it's a 4-week or a 5-week month. So that way we would get a longer period of time, but it's not too long. That way, if you don't like a certain group, you're not stuck with them for forever. For instance, 2 to 4 months at a time. You're only stuck with them for a single month. And, if you wanted to skip it, you theoretically could. That's a silly idea in my opinion. But I think this is a benefit. You would be able to have a shorter bit of time with them and then switch to the next group. It's better than having one episode at a time and then switching to the next group, and you're not waiting forever to get back to it. You are still waiting, but not as long as it would feel for like, longer period of time where they're like separate. On top of all this, I also think that it would help Brennan a lot more with planning for crossovers with the groups all being together like this. That way he'd be like, okay, so at the end of this month, they're going to be here. That means I can put this group over here at the end of this month as well. So that when we come back to both of them, we can have them meet up and group up together. I think that would be a huge benefit for them, for him to be able to do 3 to 4 weeks at a time of figuring things out. And I just think that would flow a lot easier for a DM's perspective. The downside for this one is there's no way that a story arc gets finished between that 3 to 4 weeks, like I mentioned before. So each month, it'll likely be that a story gets cut off somewhere along the way, halfway through likely, and then we'll have to wait 2 months before that story arc continues, which is a bad thing, but I don't think it's as bad as having to wait 4 weeks before getting back to one, right? Because this way we would still get more of a story built up as opposed to one episode at a time being built up. But I do still think it's a bad thing that they would have to, really overcome the idea that there's going to be 2 months before we get back to whatever the soldiers were doing. So Brennan would have to really play it out in the way that we get an episode of something bad happening, them fighting it, and then them beating it. And that could be a routine that they end up getting into, which could be a bad thing, where they end up being in a very predictable, 2 episodes of issues and then a single episode of resolve, right? So that could be bad and very predictable, and people might get sick of that pretty quickly. So again, I do think that it's better than doing it weekly if they were to do it monthly, but I think that that's still a big issue as well, because a story would never finish in a satisfactory way before it gets cut off to the next group. And then the last potential way I can see things playing out, which is the one that I believe in the most, which is switch after every single arc. Now, the reason I think that this is going to end up being the case is because during a cooldown episode, Brennan did say that we're going to have an extended period of time with the soldiers before we cut back to the others. But he did say, to sort of counteract that at some point soon, we will see the schemers and the seekers back at the same table to start off their next stories. So we don't know exactly how things are going to play out, but I'm sort of leaning into him saying that they're going to have a longer period of time before we see those characters. We're going to see a story arc play out with the soldiers. So this is the one that I believe in the most happening. Switching tables after each story arc works best for the story flow, as we would get to see an entire story play out. For example, we would see the soldiers get revenge on Casimir for what he did with the whole Theozy plan, and then we also get to see them saving Sid and getting the deed for the safe house for themselves, and now they have their own safe place in Timony for them to sort of enjoy and maybe use as a sort of headquarters and reach out to the others, before we then switch back to the Seekers table and watching where they play out from the last time we saw them. I think this would be the best thing for them to do, as we would get an entire satisfactory story, and this way, we wouldn't have to deal with too many breaks and not having to know how X thing ends with the soldiers before their story finally ends. And the only breaks that we would get for the story would be end of the month and potential holidays. So with this extended time, we also get room for more character development. We would get to focus on one group for a longer period of time, meaning that they get to grow more in a specific time frame as opposed to over the span of a handful of episodes every month. This way we get a clear road for them to be able to grow in character development, and it would be a lot nicer for them to do that. On top of that, I also think we'll be able to get more focused lore and world building that's more, specific towards the group, instead of it being general lore and world building that we've had up to this point. I think with us going to places like Timony and staying away from the city, we'll be able to focus more on that, as opposed to broader world history of Dothraki and other wars that have happened. While I do think that stuff is still going to be said during the soldiers tables, I do think we're going to get more, pointed and focused lore, which I think will be a lot better for us as viewers to not have to keep in mind all of these things that were happening at the time throughout the 70 years since the Shapers' War. I do think it'll be a lot nicer and more tight than what we've been getting up to this point, because there's been a lot. So to focus it and be more streamlined with it will be very beneficial for us as viewers to be able to really focus and zone in on something specific. The downsides for this, scheduling for the other tables might be a little bit chaotic. They would have a rough idea to expect when their turn at the table will come up, but with the way that D&D works, there's no guarantee that it actually plays out this way. So they might get told, hey, in January you guys will be back at the table, but it actually doesn't happen until, February or something like that, because the soldiers table took a little bit longer than Brennan initially expected. So with them trying to schedule other things, they'd be like, okay, I can't schedule anything in January, and then January comes and they say, oh shit, I could have scheduled something in January. Now I have to move everything in February up to January, blah, blah, blah. I do think that that is a mild downside to everything, but I feel like it's something that they've been navigating for years, so it shouldn't be something that's too much of an issue. The other downside is it could be like months and months before we see other tables, and once that's done, we might not even move on to your favorite group next. You might still have to wait another couple months before we move on to your favorite group. Depending on how things play out, it could be anywhere between 2 to 4 months with one group. That means it could be 4 to 8 months before you get to see your favorite group, which I think could be a massive downside to these switching after each arc thing, because we don't know exactly how each arcs are going to play out. Some arcs could be rather short with things playing out rather quickly. Some could be rather long and take forever to truly finish off. So realistically, it might end up being the case that we get the soldiers for the rest of the year and maybe even into the beginning portions of next year, and then eventually we finally get to see Julian, Valus, Octus, and Taisha and the other table, because they will be there for that initial thing, but then they'll disappear again for a while. So then we'll have to wait another 3 to 4 months before that group comes back, depending on how long the Seeker's initial arc plays out. So the downside to this one is we're going to be stuck with people for a very long time, and if you don't like them, that could be a very big problem for you specifically, because if you don't like this table, you don't really have anything else to go with for the next few months. With that all being said, I still believe that this is the best option for them to take, for viewers as well, for the players themselves. I think this could lead to a lot of binge watching for a lot of people, where they let, arcs build up and then they watch it. Although 4-hour binge watching multiple times a day would be weird. That would be 8 hours of your day, or just listening to it. Either way, I do think binge watching or binge listening is going to be a big popular thing for this campaign, because of the way the arc structure is going to work, if this is the case. This could make it feel more like a seasonal TV show as well, where there's clear divisions between where each season starts or ends, which I think would be very nice, because sometimes when you look at an arc, you're not sure where they ended and where they started initially. There are some arcs in the official, or I guess not official, but the way that the wiki breaks down some old arcs, they're kind of all over the place with how long they are and where exactly they break off and where other ones start. So, and some of them just combine 2 arcs that could have been separate. So realistically, you're not too sure about where those arcs line up and where they start. If they do this and they go each arc at a time, the arcs will be very clear where they're divided, and they'll be very clear where they start and where they finish, which I think would be very beneficial for people who want to categorize this stuff based on stuff like that, based on arcs, based on all that sort of thing, right? So I think this could be a very beneficial way for them to do that. I also think that the arc format works really well for people who want to necessarily skip a group of Critical Role, right? If you're not into the Seeker's table and you want to just skip it, that's an option, especially if it's based on the arc. You're able to just watch the Soldier's arc, and then once you hear that the Seeker's arc is over, you can then come back and join the Schemer's table and enjoy the Schemer stuff that they'll be doing. And, just as an example. Now, I'm not going to be doing this, because obviously not, because I have my recaps and everything, and I just enjoy every table so far. So for me, that's not happening. But for other people, I could easily see this happening. And, I could even see people some people watching episodes as they air, or some people watching the arcs once they get to a certain point, and they can binge watch a handful of episodes, like I said earlier. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of interesting ways to view Critical Role Campaign 4 if they do this arc by arc way of storytelling, which I think would be the best way for them to go about it. Because now you'll be I don't know how to put this, but you will be sort of leaning your story into the most amount of people with, I can either binge watch, or I can watch as it goes, or I don't have to watch it at all and I can come back when I want to. That to me would be the best way for them to do things. And again, it helps for the pacing, it helps for character development, it helps for world building. I just think overall it'd be very smart to have this more focused arc story structure. So there you have it, the 3 ways that I could sort of think of how the scheduling might work. Let me know if you agree, if that the arc formula would be the best way for them to go, or if you think monthly would work better, or if you think, doing every week and switching off would be the most correct. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, it would be like the most West Marchy, which is the way they've described it. It would be the most West Marchy, because that way, like, whoever's there that week gets to play. That's basically what a West March is based on what I've heard people tell me. So that would make the most sense if they're describing it as a West Marches one where they do every week, but I don't agree with every week happening. But also, let me know other potential ways that you guys could see the schedule playing out. And if it's unfortunately announced in between this video being released and me recording it, how it's going to work, well then don't I look like a big dum-dum. But either way, it doesn't matter that much. I will see you guys on Friday for whatever video I make next. It'll probably be a recap. It's the start of a new month, so it makes sense. But I don't know if it's going to be a recap for episode 5 or if it's going to be Ford and Jester's wedding. I have no idea what they're going to be releasing this week because I'm recording this before they announce anything. So yeah, with that all being said, I will see you guys then. Peace. And lastly, I just want to thank the members of the channel. We have 2 members in the Bandit level, which is Tom Koch and Eric Cunningham. And in the Rogue tier, we have Trent Lee's Tabletop. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. And if anyone else wants a special shout out at the end, just like these 3, become a member today.